Jeff Bezos woke up to the sound of a cheap alarm vibrating on a crooked wooden table. The ceiling leaked, and for a moment he thought it was a nightmare. He reached for his pocket. Nothing. His phone, a cracked, outdated model. In the mirror, he saw a face he barely recognized. Unshaven grey beard, deep eye bags, and a grease-stained t-shirt. He stepped outside, onto a dusty street in Albuquerque, where no one knew his name. He tried to order coffee on credit and heard, "Pay first, buddy." He laughed nervously. The richest man on earth now couldn't afford a cup of coffee. But deep inside, an old spark began to reignite. For the first time in decades, Jeff felt the weight and the strange lightness of being just another man. Sitting on the sidewalk, hands on his head, Jeff realized no one recognized him. The world had moved on, and he was just another tired face. But when a boy offered him a small job, something unexpected began to change. The sun was already warming the cracked asphalt when Jeff decided to take the boy's offer. The kid's name was Diego, maybe 15, pushing a wheelbarrow full of tools. He said he needed help fixing bicycles in a makeshift backyard. Jeff looked at his hands, too clean for that kind of work, and sighed. It was either that or keep waiting on the curb for the universe to return his private jet. The backyard smelled of oil and hot metal. Diego handed him a wrench and pointed at a broken bike. Jeff tried to remember the last time he'd held one, maybe in the 80s, before Amazon, before the suits, before the power. His hands trembled. He tried to tighten a bolt, slipped and hit his finger. A small drop of blood appeared. Diego laughed. "Welcome to real work, old man." Jeff smiled awkwardly, but something deep inside him moved. The pain felt real. Raw, alive. It had been decades since he'd felt that kind of honesty. The boy worked silently, quick and practical. In minutes, the bike was ready. Diego handed Jeff a crumpled dollar. "Your cut." Jeff stared at it as if it were gold. Right then, it sank in. He'd earned money with his own hands. And for a strange moment, pride mixed with shame. He looked up at the sky and laughed softly. The man who once built an empire now earned his meal fixing bikes in a dusty yard. That afternoon, Jeff bought a simple sandwich and sat on a park bench. Each bite tasted like a small victory. A man beside him complained about life, politics, bad luck. Jeff listened in silence, realizing that even without billions, people still dreamed, fought, survived. It hit him deeper than any investor meeting ever did. But when night fell, reality came back cold. There was no driver waiting, no hotel to check into. He walked to a cheap inn and tried to ask for a room on credit. The woman behind the counter just pointed to the door. Jeff slept on the sidewalk, wrapped in a torn blanket, listening to the distant rumble of a passing train. Lying there, he thought about how many people slept like that every night, invisible to the world. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be outside the system. And strangely, he felt peaceful. No meetings, no reports, no shareholders, just the quiet heartbeat of the city at rest. The next morning, Diego found him again. "Thought you'd bailed," the boy joked. Jeff got up slowly, sore and stiff, and smiled. "Maybe I've been running my whole life. Guess I finally stopped." Diego laughed, not really understanding, but offered him another day of work. Jeff accepted. Day by day, his hands grew used to the grease, his body to the rhythm of honest labor. He began to see people differently, through empathy. The more he sweated, the more he remembered what really mattered, not profit, but purpose. That evening, as Diego rode off on a bike they'd fixed together, Jeff felt something pure, joy. Maybe, he thought, losing everything was the only way to truly find himself again. If this story made you think, subscribe for the next one. The following days brought a strange new rhythm. Jeff woke up early, washed his face in a public fountain, and walked to Diego's backyard. Along the way, he greeted street vendors and old men playing dominoes. At first, he held his head high out of habit, but soon realized no one cared who he was. People were too busy surviving. That anonymity, in a way, felt like freedom. One morning, a woman offered him homemade bread. Jeff hesitated, thinking of his old habit of questioning every cent, but bought two. When she asked for his name, he froze. "Jeff," he said. Jeff what? Just Jeff. She smiled, unaware she'd just sold bread to the former owner of Amazon. Working with Diego became both relief and challenge. The boy taught fast, teased often, and never treated Jeff like anything but an equal. Jeff, who had spent decades giving orders, now had to listen, fail, and learn. Sometimes he felt anger, other times pride. It was a different kind of education. No slides, no meetings, just grease and humility. One afternoon, a man brought in an old motorcycle. Jeff volunteered to try fixing it. He spent hours dismantling parts, unsure of what he was doing. When the engine finally roared to life, Diego cheered. Jeff raised his oil-stained hands and laughed. For a few seconds he felt invincible, not because of power or money, but because of effort. That night, his earnings weren't enough for a proper room. He slept in a shelter shared with other men. One offered him a blanket, another told jokes. In the middle of their laughter, Jeff realized the absurdity. The man who once launched rockets now slept beside people who owned nothing. Shame returned, but this time it blended with gratitude. For the first time in his life, he wasn't admired or feared, he was simply heard. And that sound, those voices around him, brought him more comfort than any applause he'd ever received. The next morning, as the sun rose over the modest rooftops, clarity hit him. Maybe wealth wasn't about what you own, but what you feel. Diego showed up with coffee and joked, "Ready, millionaire?" Jeff grinned. Millionaire in patience, maybe. The laughter echoed, and Jeff realized he was beginning to like this life, not for its hardship, but for its honesty. He no longer had to impress anyone, and that, he thought, was a freedom money could never buy. Later that day, as they finished repairing the last bicycle, Diego asked, "You used to be rich, didn't you?" Jeff hesitated. "Why do you think that?" "You talk slowly," the boy said, "like someone who's had time." Jeff didn't answer. He just looked toward the horizon, a lump in his throat. The kid was right. And so, amid dust, grease, and laughter, the man who once ruled global commerce began to relearn what it meant to be human. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs hope. Days started moving faster, as if time had found a new rhythm. Jeff woke up early, not out of obligation but curiosity. He began observing how people lived around the neighborhood. Mothers turning porches into markets, kids repairing radios, neighbors trading favors. It was chaos, but a kind of beautiful chaos, an ecosystem of survival that somehow worked. One morning, Diego complained about the price of bicycle parts. Jeff listened quietly, and something inside him clicked. What if we collect broken bikes, fix the parts, and resell them? Diego frowned. Who'd buy that junk? Jeff grinned. Everyone who doesn't have a choice. And just like that, the seed of a new business was planted. Born not from ambition, but from necessity. They started gathering scraps from the streets, cleaning rusty frames, painting old parts. Slowly, people began to notice. The bikes were ugly, but affordable. Word spread. Buyers came from nearby neighborhoods. Jeff felt something familiar, a spark of creation. For the first time since losing everything, he was building again. Yet irony followed him like a shadow. At night, counting a few crumpled bills, he laughed at the absurdity. The man who once negotiated billions now earned just enough for dinner. He thought about how many times he'd dismissed simple ideas because they didn't look big enough. Now he saw that small ideas were the ones that actually changed lives. One afternoon, a man in a suit stopped by and asked the price of a bike. Jeff explained, covered in grease, speaking softly. The man sneered and walked away. Diego got angry, but Jeff just shrugged. His mistake, he said, is the same one I made, thinking value and appearance are the same thing. Over time, Jeff became a familiar face in the community. He helped fix toys, gave advice to small shop owners, even organized a weekend market. People laughed when he suggested branding or planning ahead, but soon they started seeing results. The former billionaire was quietly rebuilding an empire, this time without offices, without shareholders, without ego. One afternoon, Diego asked, "If you got rich again, would you leave?" Jeff paused. He looked around. Children playing, food cooking, laughter in the air. "I don't think so, Diego. I'd stay. I'd invest here." The boy smiled, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth in it. Still, not everything was light. Some nights, the cold bit deep and memories returned. He'd dream of boardrooms, rockets, applause. He'd wake up sweating, his heart pounding. Poverty taught him lessons, but it also tested him every day. Even so, each sunrise brought new purpose. With every repaired bike, every shared laugh, he felt the weight of his past growing lighter. The man who once tried to control the world was finally learning to live in it, with compassion, humor, and humility. That evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, Jeff smiled. Maybe, he thought, he hadn't lost everything after all. Maybe he'd just returned what was never truly his. If this story made you smile, leave a like. It helps us reach more people. Jeff and Diego's recycled bicycles began spreading through the region. People talked about them, praised the prices, and brought friends to buy. Within months, the backyard turned into a small workshop. The sounds of hammers and laughter filled the air. Jeff felt proud, but also uneasy. The old hunger for growth, the thrill of control, was whispering again. One afternoon, a local businessman showed up. He wanted to invest, open branches, scale the business. Diego was excited, already dreaming of expansion, but Jeff stayed quiet. The man spoke in the same language Jeff had once mastered. Profits, speed, domination. Every word felt both familiar and dangerous. The businessman saw opportunity. Jeff saw a trap dressed as success. That night, Jeff walked to the river that cut through the neighborhood. The air was cold, the city asleep. He picked up a stone and threw it into the water. The echo reminded him of everything he'd lost, and everything he might lose again if he wasn't careful. Growth had always been his drug, and he finally knew its side effects. The next morning, Jeff returned to the workshop with a decision. He thanked the businessman but refused the offer. "I'd rather stay small for now," he said. Diego frowned. "But we could be rich." Jeff smiled. "Maybe, but getting too rich makes you forget where you came from." The following weeks were slower but peaceful. Without the investment, growth was steady, organic. Some people mocked them, others doubted. Jeff didn't mind. He'd already learned that respect was worth more than money, and far harder to earn. Soon, young people started showing up asking for work. Jeff looked into their eyes and saw a reflection of his younger employees from long ago. Only this time, without ambition clouding their innocence. He took them in, taught them what he knew. The workshop became a school, the backyard a symbol of hope. But the biggest change wasn't in the shop, it was in Jeff himself. He no longer saw a fallen billionaire trying to survive. He saw a man finally living truthfully. He joined community meetings, helped organize cleanup projects, even led a fundraiser to repair the local park. His influence no longer controlled, it connected. One day, a local reporter came to interview the mysterious old man fixing bikes. Jeff tried to refuse, but Diego insisted. The interview was short, honest, humble. When the article came out, the entire neighborhood celebrated. No one knew the truth, that the man in the photo once ran the most powerful company on earth. That night, Jeff sat on the curb, watching the stars. He laughed quietly. For years he had looked up chasing space. Now, he looked up simply to breathe. Maybe, he thought, starting over wasn't punishment. Maybe it was a privilege. If this story touched your heart, comment your favorite lesson below. Jeff's local fame grew faster than he liked. Within months, the workshop became a community hub. Teenagers came to learn, old men came to talk, and small shop owners stopped by for advice. With his worn face and calm tone, Jeff had become a kind of neighborhood sage, a teacher of second chances. But one day, everything changed. A black car pulled up at the corner. From it stepped a man in a suit, flanked by two assistants. Jeff recognized the logo on his badge, a company he himself had helped create years ago. The man extended his hand. "Mr. Bezos, we finally found you. The world's been searching for months." The air grew heavy. Diego looked at Jeff, confused. The executive explained that Jeff's disappearance had become global news, that everything was waiting for him. His properties, his fortune, his empire. Jeff's chest tightened. His old life stood right in front of him, neatly packaged and ready to resume. "You can go back," the man said, handing him a sleek phone. "Just say the word." Jeff stared at it for a moment. Images flooded his mind. Boardrooms, rockets, headlines, applause, emptiness. Then he looked at Diego at the workshop, at the people who now filled his world. He understood. "No," he said softly. "That life's over." The man blinked. "But sir, billions are waiting," Jeff smiled. "I used to have everything and didn't know what to do with it. Now I have little, and I know exactly what it's worth." The executive left, bewildered. Jeff stood still for a long time, watching the dust settle. Diego approached cautiously. "Tio, were you really a billionaire?" Jeff sighed. "I was. But I think I just learned how to be rich." Days passed in peace. The news spread worldwide that Jeff Bezos was living in a small village, fixing bikes. Reporters came, investors called, but Jeff refused them all. He stayed, teaching, helping, living. Every new face that entered the workshop reminded him why he'd stayed. One Saturday afternoon, Diego brought him a gift, a small handmade sign, letters uneven and crooked. It read, "Bezos and Diego Workshop. We fix everything, even people." Jeff held it in silence, eyes shining. He hung it at the entrance. Sunlight hit the metal and he smiled. That night, sitting on the curb, Jeff looked at the same sky he once saw from a rocket. But now, instead of chasing space, he was finally exploring something far greater, meaning. And in that quiet moment, he realized that the vastest universe of all was not out there, but inside the heart of someone brave enough to start again. If this story made you think, subscribe for the next one. Years later, no one called him Mr. Bezos anymore. He was just Jeff, the man who fixed bicycles and told stories about second chances. The workshop had grown, turning into a gathering place. People who once came to learn now came to teach others. Diego ran the shop, and Jeff, with his calm eyes and quiet smile, watched from the sidelines like a proud father. Sometimes tourists would stop by, curious about the rumor that the world's richest man lived there. Jeff would smile for photos, chat politely, then return to work. He no longer wanted a life behind glass walls. Simplicity had given him back something he hadn't realized he'd lost, the sound of life itself. Laughter, street noise, children playing, the rhythm of real people. One morning, as he sipped coffee from a plastic cup, he heard a radio report about a wave of new startups, inspired by a mysterious old man from Albuquerque. Jeff chuckled to himself. Maybe, in his own quiet way, he was still changing the world, just without the noise, without the fame. At sunset, he walked to the same river where years ago he had thrown a stone and heard the echo of his fear. The wind brushed his face gently and he smiled. He finally understood. Real wealth wasn't about what you own, but about what you share. Money builds walls. Purpose builds bridges. And under the fading orange light, Jeff Bezos felt something he'd never felt at the height of his empire. Freedom. If this story touched your heart, comment your favorite lesson below.